Parasite Eve tells the story of Nagashima Toshiaki, who discovers that the mitochondria in our cells are a part of a greater consciousness and have been waiting for the right moment in order to oust humanity and take control of the world.
The cell questioned the mitochondria. Can you still make usable ATP? The mitochondria replied, if I couldn't find glucose, I might have a little trouble. But would you lose? Nah, I'd win.
I'm not gonna lie, I've been behind on production lately, just like the last video. Just had to write the intro. I actually had to spoil myself and the narrative, so that's cool. Firstly, we'll be going through the novel Parasite Eve, written by Shinya Hidaka in 1995, but we'll be reading the 1998 version. Then we'll, only tackle the first installment of the game because I actually quite like having free time. This game doesn't just serve as a simple adaptation, but instead serves as a sequel to the series, which then would go to release 2 more titles after that. But for this video, we'll only be tackling the first 2 because, like I said, I like having free time. So let us first get to know about the author, who they are, what they did, and what their life experience helps contribute to the story at large. While it was kind of hard to find information on his upbringing and personal life, what I could find was that Shinya Hidaka in 1995 was still in graduate school as he wrote the novel that would become a smash hit called Parasite Eve. The story as a whole was heavily inspired by the fact that Hidaka was working towards a PhD in pharmacology? Holy moly, I hope I'm saying that right. Nope. Thus, his knowledge on cells were better than the average person, which gave him the idea of the big evil being the mitochondria. Like I said, it became a smash hit, and not long after, a film was adapted from the novel in 1997. And in the same year was picked up by a gaming studio named Square, who was arguably at their prime during this time, and they worked alongside him and created a sequel to the original novel. Now he is currently reportedly living in Sendai, Japan, where he lectures on microbiology and genre fiction. So without much else to say, I literally will be dissecting this in real time, so let us get into it. Let us dive into the sci-fi psychological horror novel Parasite Eve.
Millions of years ago, the mitochondria began to live silently within our bodies. It seems that the parasites have only to live among us. Or do they?
Parasite Eve begins with a prologue. We come to meet a person by the name of Kayomi. That's how you say it. She's driving as she would normally do any other day. However, suddenly everything goes black. The building she was so used to seeing on her commute back from work vanished into thin air. Her steering wheel vanished into thin air as well. It was that damn dream again. That dream she would have every Christmas Eve, where her clothes are stripped from her body as she floats in a pitch dark tank. Within this state, she is able to change her form profoundly. She was splitting into 2, and the process was strangely tranquil. However, just as quickly as she entered into that place, Nagashima never left that car. She was flooring it, and next thing you know, she had crashed into a pole, completely destroying herself and destroying her car. Now let's meet her husband, Toshiaki Nagashima. That very morning, he had eaten breakfast with his beautiful wife, left to work as usual, and once on his way home, he'd hear the harrowing news that his wife was in a fatal crash. The road she was on was not dangerous at all. There shouldn't have been any reason for her to be going the speed she was, and there wasn't any windy roads. So naturally, the thought of this being on purpose came to mind. However, Toshiaki knew better. That morning, all they had was a normal eggs and bacon and toast. It was not a bad meal at any means, but it's just not the type of meal someone would make if it was meant to be their last. He knew something was wrong. Whatever the case, Toshiaki would rush to the hospital, and there, along with her parents, the doctors would pronounce her brain dead. The question was now, what's their next move? Keep her hooked up in these machines to keep her brain dead and wish that a miracle will come down and she'll just wake up, or allow her to donate her organs and actually help others? It's a tough situation to be in for sure, and one I hope I never find myself in, ever. Interestingly, what I realized early on in the book is that it does a very good job at displaying something overtly supernatural. However, it can be passed by a psychological strain. What I mean by this is that in the beginning, right, the wife was mentioned that this was not her first time having this dream, right? This dream happens every Christmas Eve, which would seem as a form of undiagnosed mental illness. Then now the husband just learned that his wife is basically dead, but he's describing how his body feels full of heat and how reality seems to have just gone far off in the distance. It's two very similar descriptions, however, both can be passed with a psychological stress, right? I don't know, I just think it's really cool how they did that by making it seem like this could be something weird, but they never bring it to attention for it to be weird, and thus you don't think it's weird until it becomes weird. However, going back to the story, Toshiaki seen his wife laying there on the medical bed, lifeless, plugged up to all forms of machines. A little background about Toshiaki is that he works with lab rats, dissecting them, and the thought of that happening to his dear wife, it was just way too much for him to handle. He knew that his wife would want to help others. So when they asked if it was okay for them to get their permission to collect her kidneys from her, he shockingly agreed to the procedure. In his head, he rationalized it being that doing so will extend her life. His wife isn't just his wife on the outside, but also every living and single cell is her as well. Doing this would extend her life, and any part of her, he must have it close. Also, a little something in the background. The husband made a deal with the doctor, saying that he'll let them take her kidney, but in exchange, he wants her liver so that way he can run a primary culture. Simultaneously, we switch perspectives from the main cast and go to the recipients of the organ, Mariko Enzai, a 14-year-old girl who actually had a kidney transplant that failed 18 months prior to the happenings now. At this point, she had fallen out of love with the idea of receiving someone else's organs. As she puts it, it feels cold and gross. She'll feel like a Frankenstein monster, and she absolutely does not want it. Even still, the doctors must prep for the surgery regardless. As Miracle refuses, there are plenty other people who need a kidney. During that prepping, the reason this was such a big deal was that in Japan, taking organs from someone who is brain dead is quite sensitive, and many don't even touch the subject. The patient is still alive, however, taking their organs will in fact kill them. So, are you saving a life and killing another? That's the moral dilemma here. Now, during the prepping, there is a weird part in the novel where the font noticeably changes, right? It's an entire page of text, and yet we never really know who it is that is speaking. But this mystery person is excited, thrilled, and is glad to see that everything is falling into place. Then finally, the wife. She only has 20 minutes to live, and when bringing her family to see her alive one last time, it's just tragic to read. The mother begins to wail, and the husband can't stand to look at her like this, but also can't find the strength to look away. But this is for the greater good, he believes. In his grief, the husband, when taking the liver in exchange for the kidney, he began to run tests on the organ, splitting the cells and reproducing them, calling each new succession Eve 1, Eve 2, Eve 3, and so on and so forth. So her dying here did not mean she was dead for good. But honestly, it's just sad. I sat and thought about how in the world I'll speed things through in this part of the story, right? The only real problem I have with this novel is the pacing, okay? It starts off super good, going real fast. I'm super intrigued, and then it just pauses. Okay, it stops. It stops, and it just tells you about a bunch of backstories that will lead into the greater scheme of things. But I don't give a fuck. I don't care. So what we're gonna do, I'm going to simply skip it, and then if it becomes relevant into what I am speaking about, then we will backtrack, and then I'll tell you about it. Okay, so remember how I said there would be times where the font would get all wonky and some characters began to feel strange sensations. Most times it was heat, but then I could say it's just written off as emotional strain. Like, you know, if your wife dies, I think you're gonna feel like your heart ache a little bit. You know, if you're driving and daydreaming, you might be sleep deprived. You know, it could be. Well, I would be wrong if we went with that notion. So this is when the sci-fi side of things kind of started to show itself in full effect. Up until now, it was a lot of medical procedures. It was a lot of fun facts about how the medical works. It's a lot of fun facts about Tokiyashi does for a living with the lab rats, but it was never really sci-fi. It was like always talking about cells and the mitochondria and hints to there and stuff like that. Now it's become sci-fi because this was all the result of someone named Eve. She has been lying dormant for an untold amount of time, waiting for her time to arise. And I'm not talking about solo leveling.
Arise.
In order to do so, she needed the perfect host, the perfect being, and thus she enacted her plan, her master $1 million plan, okay? The prologue, the dreams that the wifey was having, I think her name is Kayomi, was the result of Eve, and which was the reason of her crashing in the first place. However, Eve had made her crash in a way where she was left brain dead, but none of her organs were damaged in the crash. And to even go further, before the crash, Kayomi had recently become an organ donor. It was all planned out, all not controlled per se, but manipulated, right? And thus she became an organ donor. She was pronounced brain dead, but she had just hit on the brakes just enough to where it was only a head trauma and fragments of her skull went into her brain. Nothing else was damaged miraculously, but it was all planned, so it wasn't miraculous. It was meticulously planned out, which then caused the husband to go into a grief-like state and harvest her organs to grow them within the lab. The husband was an expert on cells and specifically the mitochondria, which made him the perfect subject to create the womb of her perfect child, of Eve's perfect child. One of the livers that the husband had been growing began to grow extremely quickly, developed extremely fast, and Eve, taking the form of Kayomi, the wife, and forcefully impregnated herself with his sperm. Like, that was a really, really hard part to read, because it was like, imagine this, bro. Imagine this. You just have gone through a world-altering, a life-altering change where your loved one that you thought you were going to be spending the rest of your life with, or at least a huge chunk of your life, just dies. And you're there, and you are now put in this position to do the greater good or be selfish. And you go with the greater good. You let this person get their organs sucked right out of them and put into someone else. You know, you think it's the greater good. And then the very next week, or maybe 2 weeks later, your wife comes out of a damn lab that you've been growing from her liver, turns into her, and then proceeds to rape you. Though that was only one half of the plan. Just as Kobe said,
job's not finished.
Remember how the wifey was having dreams about splitting into two and changing her form? Well, this is exactly what Eve is willing to do. Part of Kayomi was still a part of that 14-year-old girl named Mirako. And so Eve changed her form to have male genitalia, and she, well, I think you can guess what she did. Now, this is where Eve made her million years of plans. It was all fucked from here on out. When raping Mirako, she had stolen some of the sperm from Toshiaki in order to impregnate her, because she can't make that herself. She needed someone else to have it. But doing so, she failed to realize that the sperm she had stolen carries a strand of male mitochondria, that the offspring then suffered a rebellion within its own body. Toshiaki, whom realized that what Eve had planned, sacrificed himself with the ultimate being to stop the powerful outburst from harming other civilians. Toshiaki meets his demise peacefully, trying to touch Mirako, seeing her as the last remains of his beloved wife, a wish Mirako's father grants after his death. Also, Eve's body begins to suffer necrosis and half of Kayomi's cells dies, which is the end, but not really, so let's talk about it. The novel was a smash hit, thus many adaptations were made following its release. 3 games would come out, functioning as sequels to the novel. Mangas had begun publication and serialization, and it was also the absolute hardest to find. I swear to God, I feel like it's nuked from any forums online. I couldn't even really find, like, the only thing I could find was $50 books from eBay, and they were used. I said, what's happening? I was gonna use that in the book, but couldn't get to it, but I digress. There was a manga that came out called Parasite Eve Diva, which actually follows closely what happens in the novels, while the games are, like I said, sequels. And of course, they had directed a Japanese psychological horror movie by the same name, which has mixed reviews and is probably what Future Yuri decided to use as visuals for that book section that I just went through. I digress though. Many adaptations sprouted out of the story in all forms, twists, and changes, but the core of the attraction of the story was still in place. The mitochondrial evil Eve thingy, the bad guy. For those who didn't really pay attention in environmental science when you were in high school, or if it's just been way too long, because let's be real, I just graduated college and I can't remember what I did in 8th grade, bro. It's been too long. It's been too long, man. Basically, the mitochondria is the powerhouse of the cell. Our bodies run on a lot of energy, and the only reason we're able to convert things like food and water into energy is thanks to the mitochondria within our cells. Within the novel of Parasite Eve, the main big bad, the mitochondrial Eve, works the same way pretty much. And actually that name is no coincidence as well. The term mitochondrial Eve is a theory, or rather a theory of a person. Mitochondrial Eve is a term used to describe the most recent common female ancestor of all living humans. The term is based on the idea that all living humans share mitochondrial DNA, mtDNA for short, that comes from her and is passed down from mother to child. She's thought to have been an African woman who lived 100 to 200,000 years ago, and she is the earliest female human we can collectively trace our ancestry to as a collective, as a human race. Now, I'm not saying that she's the first human, the first female human, but that's kind of what plays into the word of Eve, because, you know, Adam and Eve were the first humans, and thus mitochondrial Eve is just the furthest back we can find that collectively all humans have like a mitochondrial similarities to. Imagine if that African woman was some million-year-old deity who had the ability to change her form and influence reality around her due to having access to everyone's mitochondrial code. And well, you have Eve from the novels. Mitochondrial Eve follows the concept that all mitochondria within the humans are essentially descended from a single sentient organism named Eve, which has the ability to manipulate the control of people by influencing their mitochondria, using them to simultaneously combust or otherwise act as a parasitic force, i.e. forced impregnation. Essentially, the game takes the scientific idea of the mitochondrial Eve and fictionalizes it as a malicious entity with the desire to evolve beyond humanity by taking over human bodies through mitochondria. So yeah, that's pretty much it. Eve ends up losing because she underestimated the power of sperm. So basically, the movie by the same name, as I said, has a lot of mixed reviews. The story largely stays the same, just how we get Eve becoming Eve takes a bit of a different turn and also lacks the pure horror of the novel had going for it. For example, right, the husband, I think his name is Toshiaki, hopefully I'm saying his name right. He was very much still an expert on cells and how he worked with lab rats and how he was an expert on the mitochondria and how he ran a primary culture. All of that stays the same. It's shown throughout the movie. It's all the same, right? But in the novel, it seems his wife was having dreams of splitting into two, which caused her to crash the car, right? But in the movie, they dress it up more as if Eve was like controlling her cells, controlling her to do things. So instead of manipulating, she was just controlling. She kind of just controlled his wife to become an organ donor. She controlled his wife to drive and then slam on brakes and then get brain dead. And this simple change has like domino effects of how it differs from the novel and the movie, because if it was just her being controlled the entire time, that means the crash was on purpose. Falling in love with the husband was planned and deliberately enacted, which in my opinion takes away from the horror of falling in love with someone only for a being to take them away from them overnight, while the other just makes it seem like none of the love was real and it was just for a end goal, I guess. Basically, in a lot less words, the novel makes a story of tragedies while the movie makes a story of victims of a higher being. I think something is very visceral about pure love being ripped away from the very side of you versus that love never being real. I think there's a lot of stories out there that cover this victim, you know, like a lot of horror movies, they're all just victims being played like a fiddle from a higher being. In the Nun massacre, in the Nun, they never truly win. That's why there's so many of them. Even if you do think you win, all you do is repel them. All you've done is protect yourself for a bit longer. But there's something different about this, where if it was a thing of tragedy, then it's not just deliberately a being of higher power that did this, but instead a tragedy of natural selection, or maybe a natural calamity of sorts. Because the biggest thing about Eve in the books was that she was more like a parasite, obviously Parasite Eve. But in the movie, it takes it more of like a malicious entity doing these things because she thinks she's better than humans. But if you really think about it, Parasite Eve is just a mitochondria evolving. And if you evolve to a point where you believe that all these hosts are inferior of you and you can then create a world that's habitable for you, that's what all parasites pretty much do. Parasites wither into other hosts because, well, that's just the best way they can live. And thus, I think it becomes more of like a natural calamity rather than just another evil spirit doing evil things, you know. Also, not to mention, Eve is a lot more consistent, I feel, in the novel version. Due to the sexual violence, blood, and gore being plentiful, they kind of toned it down in the movie. So in the book, Eve is a lot more predatory, raping a 14-year-old girl, raping a man. But in the movie, they try to make it more manipulative, more consensual, which takes away from the narrative, I feel like. It just, I don't know. But other than that, I understand that the movie needed to change some things because, like I said, the novel wasn't perfect either. Some parts dragged on for far too long. In the movie, some things just would not display well in a different media. So overall, I'd say everybody give it a watch, give it a try. Maybe try not to compare it when you go there. Don't think that this is going to be anything like the games you've played or the book. I think it's just a separate medium, a separate adaptation of sorts. And I think you'll enjoy it the best there. But now we have arrived, the end game. This is going to be the main event, the game, the first installment, Parasite Eve. I've heard that this game was released at the prime of this gaming studio's career, Squaresoft, now known as Square Enix, due to its merge with Enix back in 2003. And I don't know about you, but I think they are still very much releasing heat. I think they just released quite a bit of stuff. I'm gonna just display it on screen. And so for this to be like prime, like studio work, even after their catalog now, I'm excited to see. I really am. So let's get into it, shall we? The game begins in the city that never sleeps, the city where the Ninja Turtles live. The worst city to live in if you live in the Marvel Universe. That's right, I'm talking about New York City, 1997, Christmas Eve. We meet Aya and her date, Man. That's his name for now, Man. They go to see this opera play performance thing, and can I just say that there is something so incredibly nostalgic with the way cutscenes play out in these type of games. In the late 1990s to the early 2000s, they would always have these rendered cutscenes that would always be in the midst of these pixelated gameplays. It's hilarious. Like Resident Evil 0, it'll be pixels and boom, a 144p cutscene just for no reason, right? Silent Hill 2, same difference. You go meet Angela, is that her name? She scares you and it just turns you into a dang, what was it, 240p rendered like cutscene. You're like, okay. And then now this, it's something just very nostalgic about it. What can I say? Anyway, it's a super long scene of a play just going about as it usually does. I'm sure there's some kind of foreshadowing, deeper meaning to it all, but I really didn't catch it. So it's about a man deeply in love with this girl. Of course, the king, his father, disapproves and wants her to be killed. However, the son wishes to die as well if he cannot have her. So that's kind of the whole thing. And then the opera singer just starts to, well, sing. Then in the middle of the play, old girl, the girl that's singing, stares into Aya's eyes and then just engulfs everyone on stage into flames. Death quickly erupts as everyone either flees or dies from the flames. And then Aya pulls out a fucking blicky and rushes to the stage to confront this thing. We end up fighting the mitochondrial hybrid who shoots freaking ki blasts. But as she says, they begin communicating via their cells. And that's when we get a flashback of an image on screen. Then the lady dips out of there. Backup arrives and almost shoots us, but luckily we have our badge on us and they give us, well, another clip to re-enter the premises. I don't think that's very professional, but I'll let it slide. I appreciate the help. Going to the hole in the ground, Aya jumps down and finds a little girl instead of a firebending woman. But the little girl doesn't seem to be normal at all and just runs off. Running after her, we see another characteristics of New York. They're big ass New York rats.
Ugh. Brother, ugh. What's that? What's that, brother?
We see firsthand the power of the mitochondrial being as they change the form of their cells to change the rat's outer appearance. Also, I'm sorry. The scene simply gives me PTSD. Oh my goodness. You know, I always thought it was just a joke. People would say just to be mean, oh, you know, New York has these big ass New York rats. I thought they were making fun, you know, calling all the rats Master Splinter or something. No, they're real. Because tell me why. One day, I was in New York City. And I don't know what I was waiting for. I don't know. I can't remember. I believe I was waiting for an Uber. Okay. I was waiting for something to pick me up. I think we were waiting for the shuttle bus. Oh my gosh. So he had actually taken like a Greyhound bus. Now this is when I was younger. I didn't drive. And we took it as a collective. And we were waiting for it. I remember now. It's coming back to me. Essentially, I'm sitting there waiting at the stop. For whatever reason, I'm isolated from the group. And you know, Paz Yuri, gotta be cool, gotta be emo off to the side, right? There's this big old pizza slice. Like, you know how New York has that style of the big slice, right? It was a whole ass slice, bigger than the palm of my hand, probably 3 times as big as the palm of my hand. Extra cheesy, extra saucy. It looked good. I don't know who decided to throw it away, but I wasn't going to eat it. Tell me why. The place I'm staying at, the place I'm standing, has a sewer grate right perpendicular to that, you know, pizza slice. Tell me why the biggest fucking mammal I've ever seen in my life squeezes his fat self out of that sewer drainage, right? He looks at me in the eyes. He looks up. He looks down. He looks up. He looks down. I said, bro, it's yours. Calm down. You got it. I take a step back. Man bounces on the goddamn pizza. Picks it up. You know what it is? You know what stands with me? Is that the fact that it didn't drag it. It took it by the mouth and did one of these Look, it did one of these. Imagine this is like a pizza. It did one of these. I said, what are you doing? And it picked that thing up and it just went right back down in the sewer grate. I said, if that ain't Master Splinter, I don't know what is, bro. Helmy was trying to feed his Ninja Turtles. Oh my gosh. Anyway, sorry, that was a tangent. Anywho, while in search of the little girl, we come across what used to be the actress's diary. It basically tells a story of a woman who wanted to be a part of a play so very badly, but was outshined by her co-star. She practiced hard every single day, taking drugs for mysterious reasons, and eventually she was double casted. Double casted means that two people play the part. It wasn't just her, it was like sometimes it'll be whoever's performing better, double casted. She so very badly wanted the part for that next week, and her rival very next week burnt alive in her apartment fire. Maybe she did it without knowing due to her mitochondrial powers kicking in. Anyways, all Aya gets out of this is that she has a serious drug problem. Good detective work. Later, after some more chasing, Aya catches up with Melissa. That is her name, by the way. She's tweaking out as two sides are fighting for diplomacy within her body, and finally, well, it seems that Eve won, turning into this beast of a creature, and now is sending 2 ki blasts at a time. Now I hear ya in the comments,
I thought you said it was a sequel. I thought you said Eve had died in the books. Why is she here?
well, dear viewer, I don't know. How about you watch the video? I'm sure I answer that later down the video. Once defeating it, we leave the scene, no answers in hand. Reporter gets a little too close to Aya and... Damn! That's Daniel. He's a police chief and someone we'll be seeing a lot of in future events. Coming into the office the next day, the case is on, of course, and Aya wants to work it. There aren't really any leads as Melissa has no alive relatives, nor is her apartment any help as well since it's all been burnt to a crisp after the events from yesterday. Before leaving, Aya needs to pack up some heavier heat because, well, that shit ass sidearm really is not doing the trick. We need something big. We need some Doom Slayer type attire. She attends a press conference talking about the events and, well, when she tells them what actually happened, she sounds like a lunatic. She sounds crazy. Boss man gets very mad and tells us to just chill out. We do not, in fact, chill out. Daniel and Aya actually heard about this dude with a PhD working on a study about the mitochondria. That's the first stop. When getting there, it turns out that this guy we keep seeing in our flashbacks is the same doctor. He proceeds to school us on what the mitochondria is and how capable it is as well. And, well, it's also capable of setting the human body ablaze, which then could explain how Eve was able to do it. When saying her name, Eve, the doctor guy, gets tight-lipped and we're asked to leave. On our way back to the station, apparently, after the first people were burnt to a crisp in the last night's show, the show is somehow still going on. Like, brother, people just burnt alive like the other day. How in the hell did they clean them up and make it sanitary enough for people to go and attend the same very thing? Y'all not gonna close down the venue? Like 50 plus people just burned alive. I don't understand how this correlates with what we got going on. Is besides us being cops, Daniel's son, for whatever reason, went there with his mother, and thus it got a little personal. So now with the son's life on the line, Aya goes to try and save the boy, but Did Ben just die? He was with his mother, right? Did Ben just... Aya again chases after Eve, fighting a ridiculous amount of enemies only for Eve to lie in wait on a carriage ride and tells us to hop on. You really can't make this shit up. Of course, that was a trap, and we get this awkward ass boss battle, which ends up getting us a tiny bit of a reveal as Eve seems like she wants to merge with Aya, but can't do so forcefully due to her genes. Then poof, they both vanish into thin air. Also, the little boy's alive. He didn't even go to the concert, but his mother did, and now, well, she's... Death counts are getting way too high, and now instead of trying to kill Eve, the police force has now turned to try to help the civilians get out of the city of New York. However, Aya is still missing, and so Daniel goes out looking for her. Then we get this introduction to this random Japanese dude. Then we see some flashing images of the past. Looks like a hospital to me. Then Aya awakes, and Daniel seems to have found us along with that Japanese dude from earlier. This is when the timelines begin to connect. He speaks of a similar event happening a few years back, but then explains the events of the novel, basically just play by play. Aya freaks out, and tells everybody to get away from her because she believes she's actually a monster, just like Eve. When the two had touched, she felt that they were something similar, and also felt... I'm sorry, I'm like waiting for this ambulance to stop, but you know what? This brought me, this spurred on to something that I was thinking about earlier. I remember I was driving at one point, and this cop was in front of me. He just put his headlights on. Everybody spread like the river, and then he just drove through and turned them off. That made me actually, that ruined my life. Not my life. It ruined my day. I was very upset. I was like, are you serious? When the two had touched, she had felt that they were something similar, and she also felt Maya, but her sister had died long ago. The next day, Daniel and the Japanese dude stick around, surprising Aya. They don't think she's a monster, and it's a heartwarming moment. Then we go to the gun store, and we get a freaking big-ass blicky, alright? Aya and the crew head back to where the doctor guy was, and surprise, surprise, he's nowhere to be found. Aya and the crew look around for clues until the Japanese guy finds a microscope and figures out that Eve's mitochondria has the ability to take over the cell's nucleus, which allows her to change things forms at will. And this isn't even her full power. Eve is still trying to get her entire body back, and when doing so, well, she'll be at full power. Furthermore, when testing Aya cells, it seems her powers are something similar to Eve's, except instead of spreading copious amounts of energy into others and changing their forms, she puts it into herself, allowing her to protect her mitochondria from Eve's influence. Science guy comes back and kicks us out of the lab. On our way back to the station, it seems that we've been under attack. We learn that the dog started acting berserk and attacking people. That's when Ben's dumbass ran to try to save her. I guess to protect the dog. I really don't know why he did that, but he did. But of course, the dog transformed into a nasty ass failure of an organism. Apparently, all these things can just send out ki blasts. Actually, not even that anymore. This man is hitting us with a straight... But Aya is just built different and defeats the monster. The boss man got injured, leaving only Daniel to take charge. They believe a clue can still be found in the hospital, so the Japanese guy and Aya head out there, and there was a lot of fighting. Aya saves a few doctors and nurses, and they point her to the research lab, where we find a list similar to the one that Dr. Clamp had back in the museum. We also come to learn that Miracle Bray is on the very list, and also happens to be Aya's mother. Something interesting though, Melissa and Aya were both brought in on the same day for an emergency surgery. The plot thickens. Later, Aya meets up with Eve once again, and she reveals that Eve from the novel was an entirely different Eve, and that to her, she was just an older sister. But now, she won't make the same mistake as she did. So, that answers our question. We had a question earlier, it answered it, okay? Bada bing, bada boom, we love that. She also low-key reveals that she's Aya's sister as well, so that's kind of crazy. That I don't know how that's possible, but that's cool. Chasing after her leads Aya to a sewage area where she kills even more mutated freaks of nature. Now knowing that Dr. Clamp was somehow involved in Aya, Melissa, and everything else that happened this week, Aya and the Japanese guy go to the museum to confront him, and Lord, was this a long section. Goodness gracious, it was literally like 40 minutes of fighting, no stop. I'm kidding, bro. But once finally getting there, It's the Japanese dude? Huh? I thought I told his ass to stay outside. Whatever. The real Dr. Clamp comes in. This whole time, he's been trying to create the right sperm that will allow Eve to complete her body and gain full strength. So you remember how that was the main downfall of the previous Eve? So now I guess this Eve manipulated Dr. Clamp into kind of playing the role as I think Toshiaki played, where he was an expert on the mitochondria and he created these livers. He helped her get like fast reproductive cells or whatever, and then impregnated herself with his sperm. But this time around she understands that his sperm's dangerous, and so now she's trying to get pregnant again. She's trying to still birth that perfect being, okay? And thus she uses Dr. Clamp to run these studies to separate the male mitochondria from the sperm. So, and I think he does do it.
One thing I think I misunderstood was that in the novel, Eve only raped Toshiaki to steal his sperm since she could not produce her own. She didn't force impregnation in the form of Kiyomi but only took that form to make it easier to deal with Toshiaki. All along she just wanted his sperm for Mariko. But now this Eve understands that is a dangerous game to play and thus has a scientist completing the fail-safes for her.
Anyway, in the midst of it all, he tells everybody to get out and grabs a scalpel, and as he's about to attack Aya, well, Daniel comes in with the mean right hook. Oh my goodness. Dr. Clamp tells the group that they were too late because Eve has already managed to get herself pregnant and just blows the place up. Coming face to face with Eve, she does in fact looks very pregnant. Then she uses her human flesh goo attack thing to attack the city. I really don't understand, but whatever, we're gonna understand in a second. But we do find that this reveal that Melissa had gotten Maya's kidneys. After the crash, she wasn't going to make it anyways. So Aya being related to both Miracle and Maya is probably the reason why her mitochondria is so damn strong, is because she's so closely related to Eve's genes. We find Eve once again, but it's on site. She's in a different form, but it really doesn't matter. Rock, paper, scissors, gun. Gun will always win. And Eve is seemingly defeated once again, turning into goo. The story goes full circle. As it's all said and done, the crew go to watch the play from the very beginning. Again, I still have my qualms about it. If 50 people burned in a show the week prior, you wouldn't find me there. What the hell? But while the play goes on, everyone's eyes seem to glow, leaving us on a cliffhanger that Eve may not really be all the way gone. The end. Alright, so that's the ending. So in this video we covered the movie, we covered the novel, we slightly covered the manga. I don't know, I couldn't find the manga, dude. I really couldn't. I had such a cute idea for that, bro. And look, it's all cloudy outside and stuff. Personally, I was gonna have the manga, I was gonna talk about the novel, I was gonna get the novel Diva, and I was gonna show you pictures of what's going on, but that just did not transpire, did it? No, it didn't. Thank you guys for watching. I guess the only thing left to really do is talk about what I really enjoyed about Parasite Eve and what I really gained from this experience. I can see why people believe that Squaresoft was at the prime here, because like I said, there were a lot of games similar to its playstyle. Like obviously Silent Hill 2, you walked around and did things, solved puzzles, hit monsters, bonked them on the head, and it had a very deep narrative message to it. And then we had Resident Evil 0 and Resident Evil 1 and 2 and all those things, where it's kind of similar, except it's more of like a tank control, tactical movement, puzzle solving, monster getaway, right? But I really do see why people tend to enjoy this game. Yes, I think the combat is mighty slow, like it is really slow, but it's also incredibly innovative. It almost felt like a mixture of Fallout 4, or not even Fallout 4, just Fallout in general, where you could pause the game and do VATS and do whatever you gotta do. And then it was also kind of just like this in-game time-based action sequences like that you would find in maybe like modern days, like Final Fantasy VII Remake and Final Fantasy 15, where you can fight people and shoot people if all you want, but then you could pause and go to a menu and then use a certain skill. Like it's cool. I really enjoyed that part. Not to mention the designs of the characters, the designs of the monsters was really interesting, and obviously the idea of the story at hand was very, very interesting. I don't think I've ever played another game anywhere near it. It was always just, I don't know, it was such a alien experience that it stuck out like a sore thumb for sure, and it was good. It was a good sore thumb. No, but I just think that this is probably the reason why it was such a sore thumb. It was just different. It was good. The story itself, I will say, if I had to choose something to nitpick about, I feel like the story itself is pretty redundant, right? At least in the game. The game harps on this relationship with the hospital and Aya this whole time, but if you just pay attention, like very, very easily, you're gonna figure out what it was, right? I understood what was happening when I read Melissa's diary at the very beginning. I was like, okay, so we know that Aya, and we know that she doesn't have her sister and mother around. We know that it's gonna correlate with the novel at some point, and thus we see it happening, where I think she got a transplant from her mother, and her mother had a close genes to Eve, and then obviously when they died, their organs probably went to someone, and I know for a fact that Maya's organs went to Melissa on the same night, and it was just kind of like that whole contingency there. But I do think it was a bit redundant in terms of gameplay, where you just kept seeing the same thing, and then you'll see the little girl, and then you'll see the doctor in another one, and then you'll see the doctor again, except now there's two little girls, and now you're like, oh shoot, this is crazy, isn't it? Yeah, so I think that's my own nitpick. I didn't really care about that. The fighting, like I said, was slow, but I feel like you can't really hold it against them. I feel like that was kind of just the times, you know. It was always just slow gameplay. But yeah, it was a solid game. But I really don't have much more to say about it, because I feel like I'm just gonna harp on a dead horse. Honestly, I think this video might be long enough. So if you guys enjoyed this video, and if you guys really, really enjoyed the story, the content, the themes here, you know, hit a like, hit a subscribe button, do whatever you gotta do. If you guys really, really enjoyed it, bro, if this thing hits 1,000 likes in the first week it's out, I promise you I will make a follow-up video on Parasite Eve 2 and 3, and maybe even try to check out Parasite Eve Diva. I'm gonna get back with y'all. This helicopter seems to be circling my house right about now, so I'll see you guys in the next one. Thank you for watching, and see you around.